Welcome to Light Over Heat with Professor David Yamani. I'm recording this week's video from my hotel room in Manchester, New Hampshire, where I'm just wrapping up a 3-day workshop on the ethics, law, and social science of firearms and self-defense. So let me talk a little bit about the workshop. This workshop was sponsored by the Center for Ethics at Saint Anselm College here in Manchester, and it convened 15 scholars from a range of different disciplines, although we were dominated by 6 political scientists, 5 of whom had a connection to University of Kansas, but that's a story for another day. There's also a marketing professor, a philosopher of ethics, a law professor, 2 historians, and 3 sociologists, including myself. And this range of disciplines led to a very interesting workshop in which we had a range of different topics covered. And I want to run quickly through some of those topics so you get a sense of the different places that scholars are coming from when they approach the issue of firearms from different disciplinary perspectives. Given my particular take on American gun culture, I was really excited to see some papers that push beyond the boundaries of what is typical in terms of scholarship on guns. So there was a doctoral student in history who's doing some really interesting work on the origins and development of gun culture 1.0 in the 19th century in connection with the rise of consumer capitalism. And this work is really going to be helpful for me in developing my own understanding of the long-term evolution of gun culture in the United States. Another paper, very interesting, focused on progressive gun ownership and the ways in which progressive gun owners are similar to and different from other defensive gun owners. And this, I've written about liberal gun owners myself, and this is an area that's really ripe for further work. There's also another interesting paper, this written by a team of marketing professors who look at gun owners as consumers and try to understand how they, in very diverse and complicated ways, understand their responsibility for armed self-defense. And here again, going well beyond very simplistic understandings of armed self-defense as a reason for gun ownership, beyond a binary of do you own guns, yes or no, why do you own guns, self-defense, hunting, whatever. So again, 3 papers, very exciting developments in expanding our understanding of why people own guns. There were a couple of papers that I really enjoyed because they really enlightened me on some things that were happening sort of in the legal realm that I'm very unfamiliar with. So one dealt with bills they called Briney bills. These are bills that took up the case of the Briney family, which was held liable for the shooting of an intruder in their farmhouse back in 1970 in Iowa. And this led to a small, and they're still trying to piece together whether it was a successful movement or not, but a small movement to encode the Castle Doctrine in the letter of the law rather than having it rest on some perhaps more nebulous foundation in the common law. And they're still trying to puzzle out what happened to these Briney bills encoding Castle Doctrine in the law. So if you are out there watching this and you happen to know anything about how these bills develop beyond the cases that they've been able to find in Iowa and Nebraska, please let me know and I'll let them know. And another paper involving one of the same authors looks at comparative analysis of constitutional gun rights. And this was really interesting to me because I, perhaps sadly, didn't realize that Mexico and Guatemala have gun rights enshrined in their constitutions, granted in much more restrictive ways than the U.S. Second Amendment, but still very interesting to think about gun rights beyond the American context. Two papers look at the issue from the perspective of gun manufacturers. One I found really interesting. It looks at whether or not gun manufacturers should be regulated by the Consumer Product Safety Commission for defects in their guns. This is such an interesting paper. I think I'm going to actually do a video separately on it. So that's all I'll say about that for now. The other paper is written by an ethicist, and he looks at whether an ethical perspective would require gun manufacturers to do things in anticipation of the possible harm that their products cause. Obviously, this is a very controversial proposal, but it comes from a very thoughtful philosophical perspective. And so I'll also, when this paper comes out in print, if it does come out in print, I'll share more about that so that you can take on and consider those arguments for yourself. As a sometime sociologist of religion, I was very interested in two papers that dealt with the intersection of religion and guns. One looked at whether people's policy attitudes toward guns could be shaped by messaging from religious leaders. And the other one, it looks at the intersection of gun culture with American churches, which in my long delayed study of church security in America is an issue that I've been thinking a lot myself. And I'll also be speaking in January to the Lutheran Ethicists Network as the Lutheran Church in America begins to think about issuing a statement on guns and gun violence in America. So this was very helpful for me in my own thinking. Had a couple of papers that were a little bit orthogonal to the rest of the papers and maybe also to some of the things that I typically read. One was by an economist who used network data from the city of Philadelphia to look at the relationship between gun violence and arrests. And contrary to what some people might think, but in line with what many people think, he found that when there were shootings, police responded by arresting people, but they did not find that after the arrest that there was any statistically significant decline in further shootings. This corresponds to what a lot of people suspect, which is that policing doesn't so much prevent crime as respond to crime. And the other paper was an effort by some policy scholars to develop a validated inventory of survey questions that would look at people's understandings of the harms and benefits of different efforts to either regulate or create opportunities to be involved with guns. And the final two papers, which we are actually going to talk about later today as soon as I wrap up this video, one of them looks at attitudes toward extreme risk protection orders or red flag laws. And this is an area of a lot of activity both in the scholarly world and in the policy world. So very important for us to understand the opinions that people have about those extreme risk protection orders. And the last paper is actually 2 chapters of a book that's forthcoming next year that looks at the deep roots of the NRA and doesn't just look at it as sort of creating a political identity for gun owners in the 20th century out of nothing, but roots the origins of the NRA's thinking itself in a broader American tradition that the author labels as martial republicanism with a small r. Again, this book is forthcoming next year, and I'm really looking forward to it because I think that there has been, for all of the talk of the NRA, there's been far too little research, and this is going to be a nice complement to Matthew Lacomb's book Firepower, which I've spoken of very positively before in a lot of different venues. Which just leaves my paper on articulating the standard model of explaining the irrationality of defensive gun ownership, which I thought this video was going to focus on the reception of my paper, but I'm still processing that reception. I can say that people at the workshop were both supportive, but also critical and questioning, which is great. It's exactly what I needed. But in particular, people were very uncomfortable with the idea of irrationality that's kind of centered in the way I've presented the project so far. So I'll be thinking more about and perhaps rethinking ways of characterizing what I currently call irrationality. And also I noted a little bit of triggering that people were experiencing when they felt like I was targeting them, because some of the authors that are at this workshop I mentioned in the paper, and others saw themselves reflected in the paper, and anticipating a takedown perhaps by me of the standard model, there was some distancing of themselves from that. Perhaps a natural human response to that sort of thing. I know I didn't, feel amazing hearing people offering critical commentary on my own work, but the whole workshop was really carried out in a very positive and supportive and constructive spirit. And so I know my work is going to be better for having been here, however this project ends up. Let me conclude this longer than expected video with a programming note. I'm currently in the process of moving to a new home, still going to be at Wake Forest, still going to be in the Winston-Salem area, but I'm moving 25 miles west to Mocksville, North Carolina, which those of you who watched my video from the National Firearms Law Seminar will know was very crucial to my development as a gun owner, as the #1 most redneck city in the state of North Carolina. We're going to be 6 houses away from my wife Sandy's parents, and that's going to be an amazing personal opportunity for us to be more involved in her family. I'm looking forward to the move, but it means that for the next 2 Wednesdays following this video, I'm going to take a little hiatus in order to get my family situated in our new home, after which I'll continue pushing my way toward 52 videos on this channel, which I would have never thought possible, and only is possible because of the support that I receive and the viewership that I receive, that makes me feel like continuing down this path is worth my time. So thank you for that support. If you have any comments, I always welcome those, but I'll see you in a couple of weeks, and I look forward to continuing our conversations about this really important topic, generating light over heat.